Welcome to the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, where every death had a life and every life had a story. My name is Jennie Johnson.
Hello, and I'm Diane Hartshorn.
Yes, I was totally tripping over my words just then.
It's like, wake up.
It does happen every now and then. I just got back from vacation last week, like the middle of the week. So I'm still in like catch up mode. But I do want to give a real quick, before I introduce tonight's guest, I want to give a real quick shout out to gentlemen at Oak Ridge Cemetery in Springfield, Illinois, which is where President Abraham Lincoln is buried, along with all of his family, except for one of his sons, who's actually buried at Arlington. But the gentleman that I spoke with that was kind of in charge of his gravesite for that day, the tour guide there, he was so phenomenal. I really enjoyed talking to him. He had a group of students that had come about the same time that we actually got there. And so he had said, well, if you want to sit and listen, to what I'm going to tell the students, you can. We actually crept in ahead of the students because I really wanted to the students were super well behaved, but I really wanted to be inside the monument, like in that solitude for a few minutes before it was full of fifth graders. So, but I did get a chance to talk with him for a few minutes after he was done with the kids. And he was so much fun to talk to. And his facts about Lincoln, he's spent so much time learning about President Lincoln. That's and cool. All like the little things that we don't get to learn about in the history books. So he made that visit super fabulous. So thank you.
Oh, that's fun. That's yes. Nice to have a good tour guide like that.
He was, and I think the kids really enjoyed it. Like I said, the kids were super well behaved. Like they came in, they were very respectful. I hope they really got something out of that visit. Like I was thinking, how fabulous would that be to have that as your school field trip, being able to go to a president's gravesite if you were lucky enough to live near one, but especially somebody like Abraham Lincoln. Mm-hmm. But tonight, we're going to have a little fun. We're going to go in a slightly different direction than we normally go in on the podcast. We are having a returning guest. This will be, Lynette, is this your second or third time on the show? I feel like this might be your third time.
Second time, but it's my third episode.
Third episode, that's right. Last time. We did split that last one into two. That's why I felt like it was three. So Lynette is joining us tonight. And Lynette was on with us a while back to actually talk about her cemeteries that she has researched a ton with the copper mines in Michigan there. And we shared those stories. So I'll link those episodes, the two episodes that we did in the show notes in case anybody's interested in going back and listening, or if you haven't gotten that far, like if you're newer and just starting to hear us. Mm-hmm. That was really fun talking to Lynette because a lot of the things that you discovered in your mining cemeteries connected to our gold mining cemeteries out here in Colorado. So that was a fun connection.
That was fun.
But Lynette messaged me a couple weeks ago, listening to one of our other more recent episodes, and said, hey, I have this great idea. So do you want to tell our listeners what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah. So thanks so much for having me back. As we move into the holiday season, I had a couple of thoughts. When we go into the holidays, we often think of those whom we've lost. And I commonly hear from friends and family members, if only we had one more Christmas or one more day. And it occurred to me that having more time with family is something that we can not only see reflected in cemeteries, which are heavy with the finality of death and fragility of the human condition, but that they're also used as a frequent plot device in time travel and alternate history stories, including some real classics and commonly known shows and movies that I'm looking forward to chatting with you about tonight.
Yes, so I think this will be a lot of fun. We'll have a little bit of a what ifs, some what if moments, even some butterfly effects. We were talking, when she had approached me, she had mentioned, actually, you had mentioned this past week when you emailed me that the homework should be watching Back to the Future and It's a Wonderful Life, which a lot of people are getting ready to, if they haven't already, will be watching It's a Wonderful Life because that's a holiday classic for a lot of people. But it is that sort of thing, when we think about that movie in particular, George goes back in time with his angel to see what would have been different if he had made different choices or different decisions and how that would have affected his family and his life going forward. So I think this is going to be a really fun topic tonight.
Well, I just wanted to establish a little bit of a framework because alternate histories and time travel and micro histories have a lot of loaded meanings for academics and scholars who have put a lot of work into some of these topics. So I want to talk about alternate histories as things that show a potentially substantially altered future. Some of the shows and novels have rules that they can't really make a big impact on what's happening in the world that they're seeing from another time. And others think of quantum leap. The whole point of it is to change the outcome of what's going to happen.
Right.
And so if the intent is not to change the storyline, or we don't see a changed storyline, I'm going to use just time travel for that. But I'm willing to go a little bit outside the edge of the accepted norms and apply alternate history to those that create changes as they're moving forward in time.
You know, there's a really good show that does that really well, is the Broadway show Six, which is about King Henry VIII. For those who don't know, it's about the 6 wives of King Henry VIII. And of course, the majority of the show, each one has their song, tells about their marriage to the king and what it was like to be that wife, and their untimely deaths in most cases. There's only one, well, technically, Catherine of Aragon, he didn't put to death, but only one of them outlived him. But anyway, getting past that, the end of the show, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, and I'm really sorry, but it's been out for a while now. The queens all go through and they give what it could have been like if things had been just a little different, either if they hadn't married King Henry, or they'd had a different way of being married to the king or being married into royalty. You know, these are women that didn't really get a choice. They, being royalty, they got stuck marrying this jerk. And so their lives were changed because of his decision. So I always like the way that show ends, because it gives you a little peep into what might have been if they had had a different path in life and had been able to make more choices for themselves as women, especially in Tudor England at the time.
I love that. It gives them a bit of that agency that they were never able to experience, at least in their memory and in retrospect.
Yeah. And I think I haven't been to England yet one day, but you can actually visit some of their grave sites or where they're entombed, and you could have that moment where you're standing there in front of them and thinking about what would it have been if, they hadn't been so young when they were married to him, where they'd been able to tell him no, or, deal with his temper tantrums and be like, I'm sorry, but you don't get to do that. That's not okay. And so that's one of the best parts of that show for me, is that ending where they take that moment, and the writers of the show took that time to say, how would history have been different had these women had actual choices and been able to do things just a little differently? Would it have made a big difference to the entire English royal family after that? Would it have changed how England behaved and what happened? Or would it have still been sort of on the same path that it was already on?
I mean, not to go too far down that path, but if Catherine of Aragon had remained queen, then I would presume that the country would have remained Catholic, and there wouldn't have been the secession difficulties that followed. It could have been a very, very different scenario.
We would have had a completely different heir to the throne if they'd had. Now, they didn't actually have any children together, but had they, it was
Mary. But yeah, it would have been less of they didn't have any male children together, right?
But it would have changed the entire royal lineage would have changed as well from what it actually ended up being later on. So it's just one of those things where, like, if they'd had different choices and had choices, or if they'd been able to do something different, and maybe if King Henry hadn't been the way he was.
Right. And I think that really ties in well to It's a Wonderful Life, because what might seem like a small difference in one micro history, one person's story, can balloon outwards. So in George Bailey's wishing that he'd never been born, that meant that his brother Harry was drowned while he was sledding on the ice.
He slid through the ice.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because George had saved him. And so when George comes back with Clarence, his guardian angel in training, he finds Harry's grave. And Harry had gone on to actually be in World War II and save an entire ship, an entire troop of soldiers on their way to the war, and was awarded a Medal of Honor for it, and made a big impact not just on his community, but on the military and on the nation. And
the outcome of World War II.
Right. So there were potentially other places with memorials that would have been related to the story if Harry hadn't made it through. So it might just seem like a tiny little shift, but that becomes, I guess, exponential, and the butterfly effect can move on outward from there. Who else would have died without George Bailey? I think they're never named, but there was a family who was getting medicine for diphtheria, and he was like just coming back to work after saving his brother. And he told the pharmacist that, no, this is poison, and saved who knows how many lives there too. So I think it's really very meaningful to look at how authors and screenwriters have put one person significant into the story, and much the way you do with the Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery, making sure that every person's story has a chance to be told.
Well, with that movie, I have watched that movie since it first aired when in the late 70s, 80s, when it first started showing up on TV. Every year I would watch it, and my family can't understand why I love that movie so much. And I've seen it probably, I don't know, 40, 50 times, and I cry every single time, to George Bailey, the richest man, and the Bedford Falls, like the name also went right out of my head.
Yes, it is.
And then it's like, and it was Harry who did the toast, but it's like,
which wouldn't have happened if he hadn't been
right. And everybody's like, how can you watch this? It's so depressing. And it's like, how can you think it's depressing? Most of us go through our lives thinking we don't make a difference. Nothing we did ever amounted to anything. And George Bailey lived a very simple life. He gave up all of his grand plans to travel when he got married after his father died, and he had to take over the building and loan. But he built, areas of the community that Mr. Potter wouldn't allow, that he would have just kept, slums and all that. And he made such a contribution. And I think what I love so much about that movie is it tells us that we can make big contributions without having to do big things.
In small ways, yeah.
And it's always, to me, it always just feels like after watching that, you can just go out and do anything, and your life really does matter.
Yeah, I think it's very much about the sense of community and the wealth of having meant something to so many people and being a friend. And Bedford Falls, without him, turned out to be Pottersville, right?
Right.
And that cemetery would have been quite different.
Change. Yes. Actually, that cemetery is where Bailey Park was going to be if the building and loan had finished selling their subdivision.
Yeah, and it would have been, and maybe I don't know this, maybe it's in the show notes somewhere, when they go back, but Mr. Potter, right, who's the grumpy mean one, he's the Scrooge of the story, ultimately. But I always kind of wonder if the idea of, because he didn't care about the poor people, right? He wanted them kind of gone. Many more of them would have died without George Bailey's assistance, which means they would have been buried in that cemetery. But as being the poor people that they would have been buried in what would have been the Potter's Field.
Right, so often without a marker.
It makes you wonder if when the writers were writing that, if somebody put that little bit of a thought into his name, thinking,
oh, I bet they did.
And if not,
there's something to that. Well, and the writers, that's kind of interesting because It's a Wonderful Life is based very heavily upon A Christmas Carol by Dickens, which was published in 1843, and it was like one of the major, just a few time travel novels that was published around that 20-year period of time. And it was exactly 100 years later in 1943 when The Greatest Gift, a 4,000-word short story, was written by
Oh,
Philip
Henry.
Van Dam Stern.
Mm.
So it was called The Greatest Gift, and it was something he sent out in Christmas cards to his family and friends. And so the scale of what people were working with to create this story is so small. And the 30 or so years of George's life here that we cover are not very long either, but the impact that just that
Mhm.
short time makes.
Oh, yeah. And I saw a clip recently of an interview, and I don't know who she was talking to, but it was Michelle Obama, and she was being interviewed by somebody, and she had mentioned something. I don't know what the initial question was, but she had mentioned something about, for most of us, our everyday lives are not super exciting. Like we go to work, we're raising our families, our kids are going to school, we're handling all the things that we do just on our everyday basis because that's what we have to do for life. Very few of us are getting out there and being rich and famous and well known and everything. But we do have an impact on somebody in our life. And hopefully we're having impacts for good
Positive
as
impact.
opposed
Yeah.
to not so good, because
Mhm.
it can go either way. I mean, you can have an impact in a negative sense too. And there are plenty of people that have done that, in history and in modern times. Like you have choices that you get to make as the human to decide what
Mhm.
your impact is going to be, even if it's not super big, but it's there. You're that ripple
Yeah.
effect.
So I think the overall message of It's a Wonderful Life is very hopeful.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole change of the town from Bedford Falls to Pottersville that we see in the alternate story also reminds me of what happens in Back to the Future too. So when Biff gets back to 1985 and has all the answers.
Uh-huh.
the
He's stolen yep.
the sports almanac, and he's
Yes.
gone back, and so he takes over the town, and Marty's dad, another George, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's been basically murdered by Biff, and Biff has married Lorraine, Marty's mom,
Yep. And it changed the
and
entire trajectory of Marty's life too, or
right,
existence
and
in this
so
case.
Hill Valley might still be Hill Valley, but there's a sign on the ground that says Hell Valley. Someone's graffitied over the top of it.
Yep. Yeah, we don't want Biff in charge.
No.
No, no, probably not. So Back to the Future 2 is interesting in a lot of ways, and it does have the first of the cemetery usage in that film franchise.
Yep.
And Carl Sagan called it the best movie ever made based on the science of time travel. And so that has some intriguing implications to it as well. At least so far, science of time travel is known because it really isn't fully. But apparently the paradoxes and the way that they handled the different impacts and perhaps the butterfly effect seems the most realistic there.
Yeah. And that is a theme through all three of those movies, that butterfly effect, because it's every time Marty's having to go back or forward sometimes to make whatever change needs to happen so that the ultimate bad thing doesn't happen. And so, or like, and in the case of the second movie, it's so that his parents actually get together and get married and Biff doesn't take over the town and everybody can live a much better life. But yes, that's the chaos of the butterfly effect. But it's making that one little change, which in this case was taking the almanac, making sure Biff didn't have it so that he couldn't know the outcomes of every sporting event. Mm-hmm.
And I should have rewatched this one this week because one thing I really love about Back to the Future 3 and 1 and It's a Wonderful Life is that there's these big dance scenes, community or high school dances
Oh,
that
yes.
have always stuck with me. When the pool is opening up
Yep.
beneath the
Yep.
dance floor and It's a Wonderful Life, that one, has always been something that I've just wondered, where can I see a building like that? I want to see it.
I want to see the pool open up. Yes. That is, I didn't rewatch the whole movie for this. I did just rewatch that scene the other day though, because I I'm working on some costumes for 1929, which is when that part of the movie takes place. And so I was getting inspiration, and that was the scene, the kid comes up behind the one who's all grumpy that George is dancing with her, and he's like, hey, here's the key. And then you see them all fall in, but they made the best of it. Yeah, that's always a good one. Now the other movie, well, not movie, show that you mentioned that uses the time travel is one of Diane's very favorites, which
Outlander.
Yes, which is Outlander. And that one does. Now I've only watched the first season. I have not watched all the seasons. So there's a lot that I know I'm missing out on.
I'm with Diane. I've read the books and all of the accompanying short stories and novellas, and I'm caught up with the latest shows. So they don't really use cemeteries in a changing the future kind of way as much here with the time travel. But they've actually changed one of the resting places as a result of Outlander in a way. Have either of you heard of what's going on at Culloden?
No.
Like now, like currently? Mm-mm.
Currently, yeah. Well, apparently it's become such a popular spot to visit and take selfies that the Clan Fraser Memorial is currently walled off for repairs, and they are considering having to change the way that the site is accessed.
Oh, wow. Because they don't want to, it's
something
old.
popular. So, yeah.
It's going to end up being like some of our cemeteries here. I'm thinking of Salem, where we had to stay on the path, don't touch the gravestones. This is because they are so old, and
people are silly.
Preservation wise, we know if you handle things too much over time, then that makes them deteriorate more quickly.
Well, and I think these clan stones that are the one that's specifically being walled off right now are much later. They're from 1881 or something like that. They were placed to honor the different clans. But yeah, regardless, you're going to be doing, if everyone touches the same spot, there is going to be biological material left.
Or if they're leaning on the stones, or, putting stuff on top of them for the pictures. I get it. You're in Scotland, and I think that's really cool. But yeah, let's respect the clan stones, folks.
Yeah, definitely.
Outlander's probably taught us so much about Scottish history and all that, but then, it's wonderful. It's brought so much tourism to the area, and also people who don't think about the damage or the lasting effect they will have on these historic sites. And are the stones as they depicted in the television show, where they're just like small boulders that will have like Fraser or whatever on it? They're just very simple.
The clan name,
and that basically is their one headstone for the clan in that vast, I guess it's a vast field. I'm just going by what was on TV. But, and just how simple it is. And as Claire, see, that's the part I love. She went back and she could stand there on the ground, even though she wasn't at Culloden, and just, I don't know. It just,
you could feel it.
You could feel it. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I understand people wanting to share that feeling, but just because you're touching it doesn't seem to be damaging it today. If 400,000 people take that same approach, the effects are likely to be different.
Definitely.
But Diane, how about Frank's headstone purchase?
Frank's?
Yeah, Frank Randall. He purchased a headstone for James Fraser. And that was at St. Kilda's.
I am not remembering that.
Okay, it's in Dragonfly and Amber.
Is it in the book or the series?
It's definitely in the book. I think they have part of it in the series, but in the book, it's actually when she sees the stone that says James Malcolm Mackenzie Fraser, James Alexander Malcolm Mackenzie Fraser. There, now I've got the whole thing. Beloved husband of Claire. There's this is too much to be a coincidence, and that's what spurred her to tell Brianna, because she's there with her, and to go back looking for Jamie, who she'd given up on before that. So I think in the show, Roger does most of that work.
Yeah, because I don't remember seeing that in the series. I know the part in Lollybrook when they went back, and it's the current future of the 1960s with Brianna, and they're at the estate, and they had the little cemetery there, and they go, and she can go out and talk to Jamie, and it was like that was just one of the coolest things because we don't usually get to talk to our great what would have been somebody who lived 200 years before.
Well, I think that's
It's
for
200
those
years.
of us
incredible.
who love history and we stand at certain grave sites, we have those
Hmm.
moments where you're like, I wonder what it would be like if I could see them face to face now, either by going back to their time or bringing them forward to ours to have those conversations to answer the questions that, are in your head where you're just like, I would love to be able to ask, a certain question
Right.
because, and we've said this many times, especially with some of the stories we've shared, like I can find dates and locations and names, and we can find news articles sometimes or different things to help tell somebody's story. But there's always that kind of blank space in between where we don't actually necessarily know what somebody
Mhm.
was thinking or what they actually would have said because it wasn't recorded. It wasn't put in a diary or in a letter or something. So we're kind of having to guess based on what else we're seeing in in their timeline, right? So we have to fill in that blank with maybe an assumption. So
And
sometimes
lots of assumptions, yeah.
it would be
Hmm.
so great if we could just pull them up, even if you could just do it from standing at their headstone, sort of have a, a Star Trek moment with like a teleporter where you
Yeah.
could bring them up and say, hey, what were you thinking when this particular event happened in your life? Like, what did you actually say? And how did you actually feel about this moment? That would be really kind of cool if we could do that standing at a headstone.
Because then
In
more
my
times than
alternate
not, they can
future,
explain. Yeah.
we can scan it with a QR code and they'll come right down and
Oh,
See,
tell
wouldn't that be cool? It's like,
us.
how
like I
come you
said,
did this
it can be a
this
hologram.
way? Yeah. And then they would tell us what really happened, not what whoever decided to tell us what they,
Right,
happened. And just, oh my goodness, that would be, especially for women, that would be able to learn so much.
right.
This is completely off topic, but we're still in alternate and fantasy universes. So in Dungeons and Dragons, and therefore in Baldur's Gate and other video games, you can often get the ability to cast a spell, Speak with Dead.
Mm-hmm.
And it often is very revealing. And I've tried to imagine what that might be like to be able to cast in a cemetery. And it would be very scary in a lot of ways, I think, too. So I think it would have to be technologically assisted for me to be okay with it in real life.
That's why I'm thinking, like, I like the idea of the hologram. Like, they can't really come out and do anything, maybe, but it's like, maybe it's more like Star Wars, where Princess Leia is R2D2's
Right.
recorded her saying her thing.
Yes.
That's the site, she's not going to come and like touch you or anything weird like that, but she can relay a message that maybe we didn't get to relay in life. Or, like I said, there's a lot of things we say and do action wise all through our lives. Sometimes it's very minimal, but it's that thought later that you're like, I really wonder what they were thinking when this went down. Like, I think in a modern standpoint, we do record a lot more than we used to. Obviously, with
Hmm.
social media and cameras and video, people do record a lot more now than what we ever did before. But and we do leave a little bit of a more of an imprint than we once did. But historically, there's so many people, famous and otherwise, that it would be so cool if you could just pull them up and say, tell me your story in your words, not what we're guessing is your words.
Right, exactly. Or what someone is who is telling your story has their own perception
Right.
of
Mhm.
why this
You did
person
or
did
said that
that.
you
And
did.
yeah.
Yeah. I think that would be so cool.
And it can be hard to make some of these extrapolations about real historical people who aren't our immediate family members without reaching too far. But
Right.
I found a couple of cases where I think I can feel pretty confident about saying that I'm not the first person to stand there in front of that gravestone and wonder what if. Um, so Jenny says that she's found a potential example here that we
I
can chat about as well.
Yeah, I pulled up one that I remembered photographing the grave and kind of we covered the cemetery. It's been a couple of years now. So this one happens to be in Carbon, Wyoming. And we covered the two major mine disasters that happened there. So I don't remember what episodes they were because it goes way, way back.
Yeah, I was gonna say that was fairly early.
So there were two major mine episodes where several miners died, one in 1903 and one in 1908. And that's what we talked about. But there is another grave in that cemetery. And it does say that the deceased was murdered on his headstone. And it doesn't give you any further details than that. It gives you his name, the date that he died, and it says murdered. So his name was Robert Widowfield, and he was murdered on August 19th, 1878. He was only 33 years old at the time, so he wasn't very old. Now, he was a deputy sheriff there in Wyoming, and he was murdered at a place called Elk Mountain. And so I went back because I after we started talking, Lynette, about this idea, I was like, let me go see. And you had specifically mentioned murder in one of your examples. So I was like, I'm going to go look this up. So I did a little bit of digging, and I'm sure there's more to this story than what I found, but I wanted to do a little bit. So it starts with an article, a newspaper article that was printed. Hang on, I'm pulling it up here so I can read it. In the Democratic Leader in Cheyenne, Wyoming, on August 28th of 1878. So just a few days after the death of this gentleman. And there were actually two men that were murdered at the same time. He was one of two victims. The bodies of Widowfield and Vincent found in a canyon. The fears expressed in our carbon correspondence published elsewhere in regard to the safety of the two scouts were well founded, as will be seen by the following dispatch received late night at this office. A few days ago, a couple of expert scouts, Robert Widowfield and Tip Vincent, were sent out on a suspicious trail after what was supposed to be train robbers. They were to come back and report the same night. As they did not go out providing to stay long, their absence caused considerable anxiety. On Sunday last, a volunteer party went out from Rawlins to look for the missing men. Superintendent Dickinson, who went with the party, has returned to Percy and reports that they found the dead bodies of the scouts, Widowfield and Vincent, in a narrow canyon in the Elk Mountains. The bodies of the unfortunate men, Widowfield and Vincent, were found in Rattlesnake Canyon, riddled with bullets and with every appearance of having been dead since Monday the 19th, the day on which the firing was heard by surveyors. So, unfortunately, they were trying to find these train robbers, and the train robbers got to them first.
I want to talk about the story of another person who has murdered written on their gravestone. And this is the very sad story of a young girl, Caroline Schweikert. And she lived here in Calumet, Michigan, which was a copper mining community. And she was 7 years old in the summer of 1875. So we're looking at the same time frame you're looking at here. Caroline was sent out to bring home the family cow at the end of the night. All of the families, for the most part, had a cow, and they went up pasture, community pasture during the day, and they were brought home at night. But she never returned. And the family went and looked for her, and I will do as you have done and read a newspaper account about the horrible affair at Red Jacket, which was historically the name for Calumet. They changed the name in 1929, and that's a whole other story. One of the most atrocious crimes which we have ever heard of was perpetrated in Red Jacket on Tuesday of last week. It seems that a little girl, 7 or 8 years old, a daughter of Louis Schweikert, was sent out by her mother between 4 and 6 o'clock in the afternoon to look after a cow. There were other children with her, and they went towards the swamp just north of the village. Not finding the cow, the other children came away soon after and left the little girl to hunt her up alone. And at 6 o'clock, seeing that she hadn't returned, her brother was sent to look for her. He went to the place where she was last seen, and not seeing anything of her, he called and shouted, received no answer, and returned without her. When search was again made, which resulted in finding the body about 4 o'clock the following morning in a pool near the Calumet Dam, by a friend of the family who regarded her death as the result of an accident. Early in the forenoon, an inquest was held before Justice D.T. MacDonald and a verdict of accidental death rendered, but afterwards, suspicions were aroused as to the correctness of the verdict when a post-mortem examination was ordered and made by Dr. Osborne, who found a bruise on the right temple and finger marks on both sides of the neck, and so seriously bruised and otherwise injured as to leave no doubt that the child was ravished and then murdered.
Oh.
The jury, after being recalled and the facts laid before them, brought in a verdict in accordance with the above testimony. The village authorities have offered a reward of $300 for the detection and apprehension of the brute who committed the outrage, and quick justice will be meted out to him should he place himself within reach of the excited populace. I had been unable to determine whether her death was a crime that was ever solved.
Oh,
I know that 2 different people were arrested at different times, but it seems that at least one of them was let go and the testimony of another dismissed for a time, and so I haven't been able to find any real resolution, and I suspect that's reflected on the grave with the word murdered.
Mm-hmm.
And her parents certainly stood there and wondered what might have been, what might their little girl have done. Only 3 years later, her father, Louis, a Civil War veteran and Slovenian immigrant, died in a mining accident, much like the ones we've already talked about. And he was laid to rest beside her, and there's a little footstone there, not far from her grave, with the initials LS on it. But many years later, all the veterans in the area were gathered up to be put in perpetual care graveyards, and so that included removing Louis from his daughter's side and leaving her alone in this cemetery after all of those years. So her family still has relatives here, but she's alone in the cemetery now.
Somebody should have rethought that instead of just picking them up, not picking them all up, but digging them up, number one, and disinterring them, because that's quite a project. And being that old and how long they had been gone. Yeah, somebody should have
or take her with him.
Take her with him, or
Right.
maybe make his little portion perpetual care. Wouldn't
Well, and Louis' family had some luck at the new cemetery, unlike a lot of the other veterans who were moved in there. They were able to be buried within just a couple of rows of the veteran section. So the rest of them are all together, and it breaks my heart that Caroline is there all alone. I want her story to be known.
Is her mother in that cemetery as well, or did she end up moving on and going somewhere else? Do you know?
Her mother is buried as grandmother with one of their sons, and is just 2 or 3 rows and a few over,
so she is over
behind
there
the veteran section. Yep.
All right, time to take up a collection and move little Caroline over with them.
Yeah.
Put her in with the family so that she can at least be with the rest of them instead of all by herself.
And they only need one spot. Surely they can fit something in there.
I was going to say, it's not going to be much more than bones at this point. So
yeah,
they can easily bury her with mom and or
on a much lighter note, her brother Joseph. So Caroline was the oldest in the family, and her brother Joseph, who was the next and probably sent out to try and track her down that day. He ended up being a local storekeeper, and he has a lot of family still in the area, and he was known for his excellent care of his chicken flock. In fact, he even made crutches to ensure that his hens could continue wandering around and laying when they ran into difficulties.
Oh, so he had a
very thanks the newspaper for that. Yeah.
Oh, well, and you have to wonder if maybe her death influenced some of that a little bit, because he would have, I mean, even if he was a little bit younger than her, he would have known about it all his life then. Because his parents obviously would have mentioned it. So,
well, even the guilt he may have felt because he couldn't find her.
Right.
Or he didn't find her, even though she could have been already gone,
His
Yeah.
dad died in 1878, as I mentioned. Mom lived until 1931.
Wow.
Wow.
It's a long time. And she lost her husband and her daughter.
Hmm.
Ugh, it's always,
Horribly.
that's
Yeah.
so hard when you read that kind of stuff too. Yeah, both tragically. It wasn't like, I mean, even an illness, especially with the children, is tragic
Mhm.
enough, but like this was a really
Right.
tragic circumstance. And then losing him in a mining accident just a few years later, like that's one hit
And
after another.
this isn't just, what if I'd called the doctor sooner? This is, what if I hadn't sent her out for the cow today? What if
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I had sent out the other children, or what if I had gone myself? There are definitely things that I can actually place in that mother's mind standing
Oh, I'm
in that
sure.
spot in the cemetery, whereas we can't always know what people were thinking. Heck, I don't know what I was thinking half the time when I make a decision. I
Right.
feel pretty confident that people have stood in that spot and wondered if what if before.
Oh,
I
definitely.
I did find my follow-up article. So unlike poor little Caroline, they did actually catch the outlaws that ended up killing both Widowfield and the other gentleman whose name I've already forgotten. Um, so there were 7 outlaws altogether when this happened, which is 2 against 7. Obviously, the 7 won
Right.
initially, but they did end up catching them later that summer. Superintendent Fisher of the Mountain Division yesterday afternoon received intelligence of the capture of a band of 7 road agents a few miles from Rock Creek Station on the Union Pacific Road. The capture took place yesterday morning under the following circumstances. A suspicious looking man came into Rock Canyon Station on Sunday, procured some food and other articles necessary for use in camp life. Upon being questioned, he said he was living on a ranch, giving the name of the owner thereof, upon which he was allowed to depart as quietly as he had made his appearance. Parties at Rock Creek at once telegraphed to Laramie City, and Sheriff-elect N.K. Boswell, with a posse of 15 men, at once proceeded to Rock Creek Station. From that point, they went to the ranch above mentioned and took the proprietor into custody. They gave him to understand they meant business and demanded that he should lead the way to the outlaws' camp. This he at first refused to do, giving as a reason that he knew of no road agents being in the vicinity. They finally persuaded him, and there's a question mark next to persuaded, um, persuaded him to tell all he knew about the matter, and at once piloted them so close to the camp that they could see the smoke. A short consultation was held. They then moved on the works of the enemy and captured every man in camp, 7 in all, without a shot being fired on either side. 6 of them are known as Frederick Ruby, Frank Howard, Hank Harrington, Joseph Manus, Otto Olson, and the Kid. The name of the 7th man, our reporter failed to learn. Olson is a Swede who came to Wyoming about 6 years ago. 5 horses evidently stolen, besides a large quantity of goods recognized as belonging to Trading Brothers of Medicine Bow, and whose store at that place, it will be remembered, has been robbed twice in the last 6 months. A saddle belonging to Deputy Sheriff Robert Widowfield was also found in the robbers' camp and recognized as the identical one used by him when he followed a band of cutthroats into one of the gorges of Elk Mountain last summer and met his sad fate. Some of the road agents are known in Cheyenne, but so far as we have been able to learn, have not been seen here for 6 or 8 months. The outlaws have been taken to Laramie City and placed in jail, securely ironed and under strong guard. This is capturing road agents by wholesale thanks to Boswell and his brave band. So they did catch the men who murdered him. It just took some time. So that part of his story has a little bit of a happy ending. But again, I found some other articles about him in general. He was very popular in town, very well liked, considered very brave. He'd actually helped capture another band of bandits like a couple of years before all this happened. But at 33, his life was over and he was unmarried. So, I don't know, maybe he was courting a girl at that point and, whatever. And that never got to go any further, thanks to these men who decided to end his life.
So I wonder, obviously his murder, much like Caroline, but I think with her mother sending her out for the cow was the nexus point, and that where the potential of a different story was very strong, like we have with George Bailey's birth, or I guess we can use the example of from Back to the Future, the almanac, the fourth
Right.
almanac, when Biff brings that back, so they have to go back to fix that moment. So that's the nexus point. What do you think the nexus point would be for these unfortunate
I kind
souls?
of feel like it makes me wonder because there were I don't know because it doesn't say in the first article, if they knew just how many bandits they were after. Like if they had known there were 7 men, would they have sent out more men?
Right.
So it would have been a more even fight to say, at this point, if it was 2 men looking for the 7 and they didn't know they were looking for 7, it would have been easy to ambush them or easy to get those 2 men under control. So
Yep.
did those that decided they were going to send them out as scouts say, maybe we should have sent more men because maybe we would have brought them back alive and maybe we would have had them here to help continue keeping our community safe, because it seemed like, especially him, the way he is mentioned in other articles, that was a big part of what he did for the community. He kept them safe. And by losing his life when he did, then he could no longer do that. So it just makes you wonder. Yeah. Or would they have captured the men that first time? And then because, it's almost a year later that they captured those 7 men. So they took, after they killed Widowfield and his companion, they obviously robbed them, took what was good, the saddle they know they had. But in that time frame, they'd also robbed that other store and they were convicted of some other crimes later on. Those crimes wouldn't have happened had they been captured a year before.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Who knows how many other lives might have been saved there as well. So we can kind of pick the nexus points out in these stories and imagine what they might have been like in the stories of people who we encounter in our own lives and in the graveyard. But the time machine has been a way to pick a nexus point, right? For probably since H.G. Wells coined the term.
Yep.
And DeLorean is our time machine in Back to the Future. And Outlander, it's the stones, although it's not really a machine you can set a date on. That's the input, that's the connection. But apparently, a friend of mine told me that there is a renowned gravestone. It's actually a mausoleum, as it turns out, that is a cemetery time machine. And so if we go back over to England and we go to London, just outside of London in Brampton Cemetery, one of London's magnificent 7 cemeteries, and apparently the only one owned by the Crown in London, we have the grave of Hannah Courtoy. And she lived from 1784 to 1849. Actually, that's what I first read, but I've corrected that opinion. I believe she was born in 1781.
Okay.
And she was both an outcast from and an aspiring member of some high society of London during the early 19th century. Her name was actually Hannah Peters, and she was never married to John Courtoy, a man 50 years to her elder, whom she claimed as the father of her 3 daughters. But she did inherit his estate after he died in 1818 after a lot of litigation. He was actually an immigrant himself. He was French, and he's very involved. I think it was with hat making. He was a wealthy merchant at the time. And so after she died, 2 of her daughters, who were single women, only one of them married, had her buried in a beautiful mausoleum based upon the Egyptian themes that were very popular during that period. And there's also a picture of her holding an Egyptian, what is that? Starts with an A, that Egyptian ankh. An Egyptian ankh shape.
Yes.
And so there's a portrait of her holding this, and it's actually the same shape as copied on the keyhole for the door of her mausoleum. And so I just heard about this recently. I haven't had enough time to look up why the story of the time machine is so strongly associated there. But it seems not unlikely that there's some connection to that mysticism and the Egyptian
And that was
connection.
really taking hold by the time she died. That was starting to
Oh,
become
yeah.
a much bigger part of especially upper society's excitement in life.
I'm trying to find a picture of that, but I haven't found a picture yet. But I know what I'm going to be doing when I go to bed. So,
Well, Courtoy, 1849 death, and she's in London. And you'll find the picture on the Find a Grave page.
Ah,
Maybe just
that's
H Middlesex.
so supposedly her mausoleum is the time machine.
Supposedly there is a time machine hidden in her
Oh,
mausoleum. From
it's
what I was briefly able to ascertain, there
okay.
was an article published sometime in the 90s that we'll need to get our hands on to find
Yes.
out what this real connection was. But perhaps there are more cemetery time machine discussions in
oh,
our
gee.
future.
I think that would be, this was just making me think. So we were talking about just now the real life stories that we shared, the what ifs, if things had
Mhm.
been just a little different. Again, if certain decisions had been made differently, what would have happened with our poor murdered individuals? But I was also thinking about the town or the play, Our Town, which I just helped costume a high school production of. And of course, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but the whole third act takes place in a
Mhm.
cemetery. And there's a part of the show, spoiler alert, but Our Town's been around forever now. So, where Emily has died, Emily is like one of the main characters. So, we'll give her quick feedback. If you don't know the story, the story of Our Town is it's literally that. It's a little town where the people are just living their lives and they're doing their thing. But there is kind of the love story between Emily and George, who are the young couple who grow up together, fall in love, get married, and then Emily dies in childbirth. So we just got you through the whole first two acts real fast. Um, but she has this moment where she's in the grave, and the people from the town that you've met in the first two acts are also in the cemetery. They're in their graves and they're having this conversation. And their conversation is a little bit different, though, because they're seeing it from the point of view of actually being dead, right? So they're looking up at the living who are visiting their graves, talking to them. And of course, Emily's husband, George, is another George. Is visiting, and he's very sad and he's distraught and he's missing this woman that he's been loving for so many years, and she's feeling a little bit of a disconnect because she's feeling like, well, this is how it's supposed to be, like we do die and we do move on and there's something else for us besides everything on earth. But she does have a moment where she gets to go back in time to any day in her life, and she's told not to pick a really big important day like her wedding day, but to pick just something simple. So she picks, I think it's her 12th or 13th birthday, to go back in time too. And so she gets to see her parents again, and she sees her little brother, and they're in the house, and it's that morning at breakfast, and they're coming down and they're just having this everyday conversation. And she's having these moments where she's realizing the things that she does miss. Like she realizes how her mom was right about certain things, that she's telling her, mom saying certain things at 12. She's like, yeah, she was right about that. Like we all have those moments where we realize mom was right. And all of that. And she just has those little moments as she's watching that. But then she's kind of sad. And then she's like, you know what? I'm not supposed to be here anymore. Like that was then, and I got to live my life and I did these things. And now it's my time to be with the dead. And so she has that realization. So it's the opposite of what we've discussed here, where we were talking about what would have happened if they had lived, or what would have happened if the living had made a certain choice, like George Bailey, if he hadn't saved his brother, if he hadn't stood up to Mr. Potter. This is a moment of the dead realizing, when they kind of travel back in time to what their life was, where they're saying, I'm glad I had those moments in my life, but now I'm ready to move on from that to whatever comes next.
Mhm.
So I just thought that was maybe a nice little closing to this episode.
I think so. It's a time of remembering, but it's also a time for family and looking forward to a time of rebirth. And so,
Yes.
happy holidays to everyone.
Yes.
Oh,
Enjoy your
definitely.
holidays. Spend some time with the ones that have passed away if you get a chance, if you can visit their graves, or even if you can't, if you just pull out the pictures or the book or the little memento you have of them, take the moment and just hold them. We love that.
And just talk about them.
Yep. Tell the stories to the grandkids and the great
Exactly.
grandkids so that they hear them and make them laugh and make them say, I had no idea that my family was so cool
Yeah,
or crazy or whatever, might say. But
whatever
yeah,
fits in, all the same. Cool and
Lynette,
crazy are all the same.
thank you so much. And of course, you're welcome back anytime. So
Yeah, this was fun. It's a neat way to look at
Well,
things differently.
thank you so much for being willing to go off on a little bit of a limb with my science fiction fantasy approach to cemeteries today.
I love it. It's been great.
Thank you for joining us today. To learn more about today's episode, visit our website, theordinaryextraordinarycemetery.com, where you'll find additional links in our show notes. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel. And if you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Your support helps others find our show and discover all of our ordinary, extraordinary stories.
You can also follow us on social media for cemetery facts, photos, quotes, and more. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery. If you'd like to help support us financially, you can donate a cup of coffee by clicking on the coffee cup icon on our website or YouTube, or purchase some of our fabulous Ordinary Extraordinary Cemetery merchandise through our store link.
Until we meet again.